The Ministry of Defense is charged with coordinating and supervising all agencies and functions of the government relating directly to national security and the Indian Armed Forces, and has the largest budget of the federal departments of India. The President of India is the Supreme Commander of the armed forces of the country. The Ministry of Defense provides policy framework and resources to the armed forces to discharge the responsibility in the context of the defense of the country. The armed forces and Indian Coast Guard under the Defense Ministry are primarily responsible for ensuring the territorial integrity of the nation. History. Origin. A military department was created by the Supreme Government of the British East India Company at Kolkata in the year 1776. Its main function was to coordinate and record orders relating to the army issued by various departments of the government of the East India Company. The military department initially functioned as a branch of the public department and maintained a list of army personnel. With the Charter Act of 1833, the Secretariat of the government of the East India Company was reorganized into 4 departments, each headed by a secretary to the government. The armies in the presidencies of Bengal, Bombay and Madras functioned as the respective presidency armies until April 1895, when the presidency armies were unified into a single Indian army. For administrative convenience, it was divided into 4 commands: Punjab, Bengal, Madras and Bombay. The supreme authority over the Indian Army was vested in the Governor-General in Council, subject to the control of the Crown, which was exercised by the Secretary of State for India. 2 members in the council were responsible for military affairs. One was the military member who supervised all administrative and financial matters. The other was the commander-in-chief, who was responsible for all operational matters. The military department was abolished in March 1906 and was replaced by 2 separate departments, the Army Department and the Military Supply Department. In April 1909, the Military Supply Department was abolished and its functions were taken over by the Army Department. The Army Department was redesignated as the Defense Department in January 1938. The Department of Defense became the Ministry of Defense under a cabinet minister in August 1947. Post-independence changes. The functions of MOD, which in 1947 was mainly logistics support to the armed forces, has undergone far-reaching changes. In November 1962, following the 1962 war, a Department of Defense production was set up to deal with research, development and production of defense equipment. In November 1965, the Department of Defense Supplies was created for planning and execution of schemes for import substitution of requirements for defense purposes. These 2 departments were later merged to form the Department of Defense Production and Supplies. In 1980, the Department of Defense Research and Development was created. In January 2004, the Department of Defense Production and Supplies was renamed the Department of Defense Production. A scientific advisor to the Defense Minister was appointed to advise on scientific aspects of military equipment and the research and design of Defense Forces equipment. Ace navigation and avionics scientist Dr. G. Sathish Reddy is the present scientific advisor to Raksha Mantri. The Department of Ex-Servicemen Welfare was created in 2004. Role. The responsibility for national defense, according to official website of the ministry, rests with the Cabinet, which is discharged through the Ministry of Defense, which provides the policy framework and wherewithal to the armed forces to discharge the responsibilities in the context of the defense of the country. The Raksha Mantri is the head of the Ministry of Defense. The Defense Ministry is responsible for obtaining policy directions of the government on all defense and security-related matters and communicating these directions to services headquarters, inter-services organizations, production establishments and research and development organizations. The MOD works closely with the National Security Council, Ministry of External Affairs and the Ministry of Home Affairs. Ministers. MOD is headed by the Union Cabinet Minister for Defense, who is supported by one Minister of State. Defense Civilians. Defense Secretary, senior officials and scientific advisor to Defense Minister. The ministers are supported by a number of civilian, scientific and professional military advisors. Scientific advisor to Raksha Mantri plays a key role in formulation of R&D policies and promoting self-reliance in Indian defense industries. Ace avionics and navigation scientist Drive G. Sathish Reddy is the present Room. The Defense Secretary as head of the Department of Defense is the senior-most civil servant and is responsible for coordinating the activities of the 4 departments in the ministry. Her role is to ensure that the MOD operates effectively as a department of the government. Defense Secretary is assisted by additional secretaries and joint secretaries to Government of India posted in the ministry. Civil services under MOD. The MOD is cadre controlling authority of several civil services including Indian Defence Accounts Service, Indian Defence Estates Service, Indian Ordnance Factories Service, Indian Defence Service of Engineers, Defence Aeronautical Quality Assurance Service, Defence Quality Assurance Service, Defence Research and Development Service, Indian Ordnance Factories Health Service, Border Roads Engineering Service, Indian Naval Armament Service, and Armed Forces Headquarters Civil Services. Finance Division. The Finance Division of the Ministry of Defense is headed by the Secretary Defense. She exercises financial control over proposals involving expenditure from the defense budget and is responsible for the internal audit and accounting of defense expenditure. In the latter tasks, he is assisted by the Controller General of Defense Accounts. Chiefs of the Tri-Services. In 1955, the title of Commander-in-Chief was abolished and the 3 service chiefs were designated as the Chief of the Army Staff, the Chief of the Naval Staff and the Chief of the Air Staff. The heads of the 3 services of Indian Armed Forces are Chief of the Army Staff, General Dalbir Suhag, Chief of the Naval Staff, Admiral Sunil Lamba, Chief of the Air Staff, Air Chief Marshal Arap Raha. Organization. Departments. The Ministry of Defense consists of 4 departments: Department of Defense, Department of Defense Production, Department of Defense Research and Development, and Department of Ex-Servicemen Welfare. The Defense Secretary functions as head of the Department of Defense and is additionally responsible for coordinating the activities of the 4 departments in the ministry. The principal functions of all the departments are as follows. The Department of Defense deals with the integrated defense staff, the 3 services and various inter-service organizations. It is also responsible for the defense budget, establishment matters, defense policy, matters relating to the Parliament, defense cooperation with foreign countries and coordination of all activities. The Department of Defense Production is headed by a secretary and deals with matters pertaining to defense production, indigenization of imported stores, equipment and spares, planning and control of departmental production units of the Ordnance Factories Board and for defense public sector undertakings. Inter-Services Organizations Integrated Defense Staff. To ensure a high degree of synergy between the armed forces, the government has set up the Integrated Defense Staff, headed by the Chief of Integrated Staff as the chairman. It was created on 1 October 2001 based on the recommendations of the group of ministers which was set up in 2000 to review India's defense management. It acts as the point organization for integration of policy, doctrine, warfighting and procurement by employing best management practices. Chiefs of Staff Committee. Chiefs of Staff are the authority for advising the defense minister and normally through him the Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs on all military matters which require ministerial consideration. The IDS is the principal arm and secretariat to the Chiefs of Staff Committee. Composition. The COSC is composed of Chief of the Army Staff, Chief of the Naval Staff, Chief of the Air Staff, and Chief of Integrated Defense Staff. The scientific advisor to the Minister of Defense is invited to attend whenever needed. The member longest on the committee is the chairman.